Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, we'll have the press preview for you. We'll take a look at the front pages of Friday morning's papers. But first, our top stories. Boris Johnson says his government will proceed with maximum caution when easing lockdown restrictions. Scotland's First Minister has warned that dropping the stay-at-home message would be catastrophic. The Bank of England has predicted that the economy is headed for its worst recession in 300 years. And official figures from the Office for National Statistics show black people are twice as likely as white people to die from COVID-19. Hello, so it is time for the press preview. Our first look at the front pages. Well, tonight we'll see what's making the headlines with the political journalist Isabel Oakeshott and the Observer's Sonia Sodha. But first, let's take a look at some of those front pages for you. We're going to start with the Times. It suggests that the Prime Minister will keep Britain in lockdown until next month after warnings that easing restrictions will risk further outbreaks in care homes and hospitals. The Guardian leads with the lockdown as well, saying the government is trying to regain control with fears Number 10 has lost grip on lockdown exit plans. The Eye leads with the lockdown as well, echoing the Prime Minister's comments for people to cycle to work so as not to crowd public transport. The FT leading with the pandemic's impact on the economy, with the Bank of England warning of the worst recession since 1709. The Daily Telegraph leading with the 75th anniversary of VE Day, saying we owe it to the wartime generation to protect them from the virus in care homes. Keep smiling through is the headline in the Daily Express, as tomorrow marks 75 years, of course, since the end of the Second World War in Europe. The Daily Mirror calls tomorrow a day of hope as the nation fights another cruel enemy. Here's the Northern Echo. It has the historic photograph of Winston Churchill announcing the end of the war to the nation in 1945. The Daily Star says Colonel Tom Moore, who has raised almost £33 million for the NHS, will lead the 75th anniversary of the VE Day celebrations tomorrow. And Give It Back, the fundraising site that took donations for Captain Tom's NHS effort, urged to repay fees, is on the front page of The Sun. And I'm joined now by Isabel Oakeshott and Sonia Sodha. Great to see you both. Thanks for being with us this evening. Isabel, let's start with the front of the Times, shall we? The Prime Minister to keep Britain in lockdown until June. It's been a tricky day today for the government with sort of mixed messaging.
Yeah, so I don't think many people will be surprised at this front page saying that we're not really going to be seeing anything particularly different between now and the beginning of next month. All the anticipation has been surrounding the Prime Minister's planned statement to the nation on Sunday. And I think where Downing Street have got themselves into a bit of bother is by continuing to build up anticipation over what might be in that statement on Sunday, and in the meantime trying to fill the airwaves with their usual Downing Street press conference in the evening around 5 o'clock, where there really isn't much that ministers can say because they don't want to preempt what he's going to say on Sunday. So we have this rather ridiculous situation where, you know, there's journalists have been pointing out at the press conference that it may be that on Monday he says we are allowed to start sunbathing again. Great concession there. And yet on Sunday this weekend we're being told nothing has changed. So you can't sunbathe this weekend, but you might be able to on Monday. It's all a bit of a muddle, really.
Sonia, let's move on to the front page of The Guardian. Same story, slightly different take. Fears Number 10 has lost grip on lockdown exit plans. I mean, there does seem to have been some confusion, and certainly the papers over the last few days have all been speculating about what lockdown measures may be announced on Sunday. Did you get the sense today that the government has been rowing back somewhat?
Yes, I did. And I think this Guardian story very much follows in the vein of what Isabel was just saying, which is that there's been some real mixed messages from government. So in the last few days, we've had newspapers have been quite supportive of the government in the past, splashing on this idea that we're going to get to see a nice relaxation of restrictions. And then, yeah, it really did feel like the government in the press conference today was rowing back from that. And I think this is a government that's got to got into trouble with some of this stuff before. So if we think back to the Easter bank holiday weekend, our last bank holiday weekend, going into that weekend, we were seeing ministers anonymously brief the press that the public had been too obedient, and lots of talk by, again, anonymously briefing ministers about when restrictions were going to be released, even back at that early stage. And I think we've seen the same thing here, which is briefings being given to the papers, perhaps the government trying to road test messages without them ever being the absolutely official message of the government. And I think there are people, and this is really reflected in the Guardian story, they quote a scientific advisor to the government saying that they're concerned about this. And I think the reason for the concern is that when you've got newspaper headlines quite bombastically saying this week, oh, you know, happy Monday, there's going to be a relaxation of restrictions, and then actually that's not the official government, the message coming out from the government, it gets really confusing for people, especially when we're going into a bank holiday with lots of lovely weather. But it was very clear at the press conference today, the infection rate hasn't come down sufficiently in order to allow for a big relaxing of restrictions. So I think it's going to feel very, very incremental, whatever the government announces on Sunday.
I mean, what's very bizarre, Isabel, I mean, you've been a journalist for a long time. Was it the case that the government were briefing a certain set of plans and then decided, oh, crumbs, we've gone too far? And of course, Nicola Sturgeon's comments not helping.
Well, there's certainly some complications being created by the devolved administrations, and that sort of rather elbowing to get in there first that we're seeing, fair enough, I think, from Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, and also the Welsh administration. I mean, we've seen really very little of Boris Johnson this week, and I guess that we're being tantalised with the prospect of the big build-up, the big reveal on Sunday when the Prime Minister emerges from his lair and gives us all whatever news he has built us up to. And into that vacuum have come the devolved administrations setting out their own plans for what they're going to do, or rather at least saying what they're not going to do. So we've had Nicola Sturgeon warning that any diminishment, any watering down of the stay-at-home message, she has said, may be catastrophic. And at the same time, the Welsh administration seems to be saying, there was a headline around earlier today, I think on the BBC, that schools won't go back at the beginning of June in Wales. So the impression that we're left with is of a English government that's sort of trying to struggle slightly to keep up with the rest. And I think the other difficulty and the challenge for Downing Street is that they're also sort of wrestling with this lockdown, somewhat fraying at the edges. For various reasons, I had to be on some main roads today, and it was really quite striking how much traffic there was. You wouldn't really have noticed if you hadn't known that there was a lockdown on, you wouldn't have told from the level of traffic. It was very much back towards a feeling of business as usual. So, you know, to a certain extent, the government is playing catch up, not only with the devolved administrations, but also with people somewhat deciding that they're going to go back to work if they can.
Yeah, I mean, Sonia, do you think that that tension between Westminster and the devolved administrations is going to get worse over coming days?
Well, I think we've already seen it get relations get a bit frayed, actually, with ministers in Westminster basically accusing, Nicola Sturgeon of sort of trying to get out ahead of Westminster in announcing things. But I think it's completely fair enough. And we know that the government is really keen to avoid different sort of regional relaxations in the lockdown, if possible, because that could lead to quite confusing messaging. But I think it's a completely different issue when you've got nations like Wales, like Scotland, with their own devolved governments. I think it's right. Nicola Sturgeon does speak for Scotland, and I think it's right that that measures are put in place that are right and specific for Scotland. But it is a tricky timing issue for the government, because what normally happens is that you have Cobra meeting, which obviously Nicola Sturgeon is at. Yep. And then she will go away and make her own decisions for Scotland off the back of that. But often the turnaround on that is much, much quicker than the British government, the Westminster government rather, making an announcement. So that's, I think, where the tensions are coming from here.
Yeah. Isabel, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I was just wanting to come back on your question about the briefing of certain papers or certain segments of the media. I mean, in reality, what happens is that journalists have their own contacts. So if you're a Westminster journalist, you will have certain cabinet ministers or their aides that you have got to know and cultivated over the years. So you will get your own little briefing from your own contacts. And that is what leads to sometimes apparently conflicting stories in the press, or stories that appear that actually aren't quite what Downing Street would like to be in there. So particularly at the moment when, the machine is operating all on a kind of remote basis, it's quite difficult, I imagine, for Downing Street to keep control. And in a physical sense, the government is not in one room, barely ever is. So you've got an awful lot of potential there for different messages to creep in.
Yeah, Sonia, let's bring in the Daily Telegraph. We've just got about a minute. Stay-home advice to be scrapped. What's the opposition saying about all of this?
So the line that Keir Starmer is going with, which is on the front of the Telegraph, tomorrow's Telegraph, is very much about care homes. And this is an issue that Labour have been pushing for a number of days now, along with lots of other kind of experts, because what it looks like is that the infection rate is being kept quite high because of the epidemic and care homes. And I think there are really serious questions to be asked. We saw a very rapid response within the NHS around the building of the NHS Nightingale hospitals. And I think it's becoming quite clear that the same level of energy and investment of effort wasn't put into care homes. So we saw patients discharged to care homes, either COVID positive or hadn't been tested, putting other care home residents at risk. So Labour, on the front page of the Telegraph, Sir Keir Starmer's written an article for the Telegraph, are trying to make the link between actually a lot of people living in care homes were part of the generation that fought in the Second World War. So he's making a link to VE Day there.
OK, Sonia, Isabel, thank you for the moment. We've got to go to a break. Coming up, extra protection needed for black and ethnic minority people who are more likely to die from COVID-19. We'll be talking about that and plenty more after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Isabel Oakeshott, Sonia Sodha still with us. And let's go straight to page 8 of the Daily Mail, Sonia. This very worrying story, fresh calls to shield ethnic workers from the NHS front line. A new study showing that minorities are more likely to die from COVID-19.
Yes, that's right. So these are really robust figures. They're from the Office for National Statistics, and they look at the extent to which people from certain ethnic minorities are more likely to die of COVID-19. And they're very worrying, as you say. So for black people, it's 4 times as high, taking into account age. It goes down to about twice as high when you take into account social deprivation as well. It's also higher, for example, for people of Bangladeshi origin. So really, really worrying figures. We know as well that a lot of NHS staff on the front line, a really significant chunk of them, are minority ethnic. They're black or Asian. And so this is really a story about the extent to which minority ethnic workers need to be shielded from the front line. There are reports now that some hospitals, for example, are saying to workers, if you don't feel comfortable on the front line, let us know and we'll see what we can do. The real problem is, of course, is that when such a significant proportion of doctors, nurses, healthcare assistants, etc., are from an ethnic minority, if you've got large numbers stepping back from the front line, that puts the NHS under strain as well. But I know that the NHS and care homes, I'm sure, will be thinking about how to protect people from an ethnic minority background, given it does seem to mean that you are at higher risk from the virus.
Yeah, certainly something that needs to be addressed immediately. And let's finish with the front page of the Daily Mirror. A rather wonderful photograph there of a street party in full flow. Of course, street parties cancelled for the 75th anniversary. A lot of papers, Isabel, making that comparison, of course, between the fight that we all went through in World War II and the enemy that is COVID-19.
And yeah, I mean, of course, are very, very different situations. But I think it will be interesting to see tomorrow just how many sort of areas and towns manage to generate a little bit of community spirit. Certainly where I live, there's lovely bunting up, and a lot of people have got flags in their windows and signs up. So look, we need anything to raise our spirits at this point. And of course, for the small number of people still surviving who remember that amazing day, this is going to be an incredible anniversary.
Sonia, 10 seconds, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a lot in store. The Queen's going to be doing a broadcast at 9 o'clock, which will be the first time that we're hearing from her since she did that broadcast about a month ago. I think Dame Vera Lynn is going to be doing a rendition of We Will Meet Again. So as Isabel says, I think that, it's going to be a different sort of anniversary to the one that was envisaged when the government announced a bank holiday tomorrow. Then there were going to be lots of street parties, etc. That's not going to be happening with social distancing, but it is still a really, really important anniversary for the country to mark.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, my kids have been making bunting as well. Sonia, Isabel, always great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Plenty more top of the hour.